All right, so today we are going to start talking a little bit about Gatsby. Um, Gatsby's been kind of like a hot topic for a little while now, and I kind of started recently diving into it a little bit and just messing around with it. And uh, as far as a static site generator goes, Gatsby seems to be uh, a really, really good solution. There's quite a few other options out there. 11D is one. I think there's a couple more. I mean, Jekyll used to be the go-to static site generator, but that seems to have changed a little bit now. Gatsby is just super popular, and for good reason. The workflow with Gatsby just makes a lot of sense. The documentation is great. The community seems pretty solid. There's quite a few people out there streaming Gatsby stuff, which is really cool to see. So yeah, so I figured I'd give my or try my hand at kind of building out a Gatsby site. So we're going to do this over the course of, I mean, several streams for sure. But I kind of wanted to just take a stab at going through the whole process and try and do this hopefully a couple times a week, at the very least once a week. We'll kind of jump back into this site where we left off. A little bit of background too on what we're going to be building. I recently started doing freelance work and need to build a website for the company that a friend of mine, Kelly, and I started. It's called House of Giants. So you can see on the in VS Code, actually the text is probably really small. Blow that up a little bit so that you can see it. Hopefully, there it goes. Yeah, so we'll it's called House of Giants. You'll see that name a whole bunch, but yeah, that's essentially what we're going to be building, is the portfolio site for our freelance company. And I figure this is probably just a good way to get people to see the full process of building a site in Gatsby and what that looks like. There's going to be likely a lot of times where we're just poking around trying to find out how to do things in Gatsby, because I'm not by any means a seasoned veteran at building Gatsby sites. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. That's more or less what we will be tackling in this series of streams. Let's just go to the Gatsby site and kind of look at some of the features, what we're going to be using Gatsby for, why we're going to be using it. A couple things right off the bat that I really like about Gatsby is its access to GraphQL, and it's how easy it is to pull data from your site, query it through GraphQL, and then output it in a React app. It makes things nice and smooth. It feels nice. You're using modern technologies like GraphQL and React. So yeah, that'll be interesting and fun to kind of learn about as we go. One of the things too, so my personal site uses Gatsby as well. And one of the things that I really like about it is it mirrors how I used to do things in Jekyll, which was by writing blog posts in Markdown, just simple Markdown files, and essentially just outputting that Markdown as individual blog posts. It kept things super clean. I like writing in Markdown for blog posts. It just feels nice. And yeah, so that's something that we can do with Gatsby as well. When I converted my personal site from Jekyll to Gatsby, there were a couple of like gotchas, a couple of plugins and stuff that you needed to install in order to get your Gatsby site to render the markdown stuff properly. I think I had to jump through a few more hoops than you normally would, just because I was migrating from Jekyll to Gatsby. But we'll look into that and see what we can do there. I'm not sure that this portfolio site that we're going to be building is going to necessarily have a blog to start out with. We're going to keep things fairly simple and just output some pages. We'll probably have like case study pages where we have a piece of work that we've done that we'll want to like show off. We'll figure out the layout for that and all of that type of stuff. So I don't have like any real designs in mind. So as throughout the week before the streams, I will do my best to come to the table with some ideas, at least for what we can be building visually. But a lot more of this is going to be focused on figuring out Gatsby functionality and all of that. So really the first thing that we're going to do here today, our objective for the day, is to just essentially let's get a blank Gatsby starter theme going, get that all set up and feeling nice. And then one of the things that I like to do initially is apply the CSS architecture that I like to work within. For this site, we're going to be using styled components, which might be a drama-inducing buzzword, but I like I want to personally explore what it's like to build a full site out with styled components and see what we can do with it, and figure out along the way what the pain points are, what the benefits are, and see if it's worth adding to our like arsenal, our tool chain, I guess, of things that we use commonly. So it really is going to be a learning experience for me, and hopefully for all the folks watching too. I think it should be pretty fun. So that's essentially what we're going to do today, is just kind of get our site structure set up and the CSS architecture in a place that feels good. So yeah, I think we'll just jump right into it. Let me close a couple of these blinds. It's kind of dark. Oh, I'm not sure that that's any better. Yikes. Well, I think this will work for now. Hopefully it's a little better. The light behind me there. All right, cool. So yeah, let's just kind of dive into this. So the first thing that we want to do, I have a just an empty folder set up on my local machine for our House of Giants site. Everything for Gatsby and all of the files and stuff will just dump right into this folder. So I've played around with this a little bit before, like I said, but the first thing that we're going to want to do is make sure that we get the Gatsby CLI. Yeah, we're going to need to install the Gatsby CLI. So I already have this installed on my local machine, but it's just an NPM package that you install globally, and that allows you to essentially just run this command to start creating new sites. There's a couple of parameters that we can pass to the new Gatsby site. One of the cool things, and this is relatively recent, I think, but one of the cool things about Gatsby is their themes. I think that they have there's a list of Gatsby themes that I've seen before. Let's see. Usually what I like to do is start out with their Hello World theme. I was looking at this yesterday. There we go. It's a good thing I have some notes. There we go. Starters. This is what I was looking for. Sweet. So they have if you just go to gatsbyjs.org/starters, they have a giant list of starter templates, starter themes, that make it really easy to kind of just dive in. Some of them are relatively robust. There's a Netlify CMS one. They have a portfolio starter, some universal, like just site things. There's demos for all of them. So you can kind of see that. Oh, interesting. That one has an intersection observer. You can see that they have quite a few options to work with initially. There is a super blank one that I like to start with that has absolutely nothing in it. Each one of these starters has a list of the dependencies that the starter relies on. So like if we go back to, let's find one of these more robust ones. You can see that the dependencies start to grow as the theme gets more complex. So this one's pretty sweet. I like that little parallax-y scroll. Neat. So yeah, they have quite a few options, but as the dependencies grow, the size of the site grows and all of that type of stuff. So I like to keep things super simple for myself, because otherwise I'll get lost in the weeds trying to do way too many things. So this just helps keep everything nice and clean. So they have a nice little snippet here that once you have the Gatsby CLI installed globally on your machine, there's just a Gatsby command that starts the Gatsby starter hello world, and you pass it the link to the repo for that starter theme. So it makes it nice and easy. So we'll just go ahead, copy and paste that, and run that. Hopefully the text size and everything is all right. Once we actually get into some files, you can let me know if I need to increase it or if it's too big. Definitely should figure out some waiting music for when npm packages are installing, because I feel like that's one of the things that, like, anyone who streams code, there's always a silent period when you're installing npm packages. You're just waiting for stuff. Okay, cool. Looks like my Gatsby CLI is a little out of date. Oh, that's all right. Cool. So that should have dropped all of the Gatsby starter files into a Gatsby starter hello world folder. Let me... I hate how I can't open it from there. Stream, House of Giants. Let's just move all of this into the root. Okay, it's going to be nice and difficult. Why don't you just move that? Okay. What else would possibly be using that? Too many active changes. Okay, we don't need this to be a git repo because that's a git repo from Gatsby. Windows is awesome. I just want to move these folders. Like, it's not that big a deal. Let's just move. This is still in use by something. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. We're going to do the same thing, not within folder. I'm going to open a new terminal and delete House of Giants. No, it's probably not going to actually work because I'm editing in WSL. I don't need to be here. We will wait for the theme to download. Off to a good start already, huh? This is always how it goes. I had a nice, perfectly laid out plan that I was going to follow, and things were going to work great. We're going to go ahead and just, pull down the theme, and everything was going to work smooth. But that's way too much to ask on a live code stream. All right, so we've got the Gatsby starter in the root here. I'm going to disconnect this from WSL because that always causes me a headache. Go to the stream. House of Giants, get rid of that. TTR, thank you for the follow, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's fine. Get me out of here. There we go. Cool. All right, so that got rid of that. Let's go ahead and make a new folder through here. House of Giants. I will open this in a new window and see if we can move some files. Just a very basic system requirement here. Let's just move. Make it nice and easy. Look at that. Beautiful. Okay, great. So if we go into the House of Giants folder, awesome. We now have a Gatsby install complete with node modules. It looks like it installed the node modules and everything for us. I'm going to go ahead and just open this directly in my VS Code here. Hopefully it won't kick me into WSL and cause me all kinds of problems like it did the first time. I think we're in good shape. Yo, thanks, TT. I really appreciate that. It's definitely my pleasure. It's as much fun for me to do this stuff and just talk to as many people in the community as possible. Hopefully it's enjoyable to you folks as well. But I just love having these conversations and exploring new stuff with people and yeah, just that whole community. It's awesome. I definitely love it. So yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Cool. So I think that we have the beginnings of a Gatsby site. Like I said, it looks like it installed the node modules and everything for us already. We'll kind of go through this package.json and update some of this to be House of Giants specific. But let's just see what we're working with here. So if we run Gatsby, why can I not see anything on my terminal? Okay, let's reopen that. There we go. Let's just do an npm run develop and see what we're working with here. Something is already running at port 8800. Oh boy, let's see. I might have one of my other projects running. Give me 1 second. yeah, naturally. All right, let's cancel out of that. Run this one more time and see if we can get something is still already running at port 8000. How many projects am I working on here that have? Yeah, should just be the one. Okay, let's try running on a different port. I assume it'll tell me what port it chose for us. What a weird port. All right, port 16083. All right. So we go to the browser here, and I'm going to just click on both of these. Awesome. That is great. We've got our Hello World starter theme completely blank. The source of this super empty, super straightforward. Doesn't have a lot of dependencies, which I like, especially for starting out fresh. You know, we definitely want to build on top of stuff and not start our theme with a bunch of bloat. So this Hello World theme is going to work out well for us. So let's just go ahead and change this Gatsby starter Hello World in the package to House of Giants. Adjust the description, portfolio, site for House of Giants. If my keyboard is like super annoying, I apologize. My mic is closer to my keyboard than it used to be. I need to figure out some like noise gating on this audio setup to avoid that. But yeah, appreciate you bearing with me if it is loud. Cool. So the only dependencies that we've got are Gatsby React and React DOM. Super straightforward. Gatsby is using Prettier by default, it would appear. Let's look at that. Yeah, so this Hello World theme comes with Prettier, which is good. Definitely because yeah, Prettier is what I want to use for our style linting for sure. So I think that should work well. Cool. It is TT. It is not a Chroma, although I did used to have one. It's an Ergodox. Not if you've heard of those. It's one of those keyboards. It's like split. I'm gonna hold it up and show you. This is like half of it. I like this keyboard a lot. But yeah, I had some switches on there that were quieter, but I for whatever reason the switches were not. They were like way too sensitive. Yeah, I did break my keyboard in half. So yeah, I had some switches on here that were quieter, but they kept like randomly just repeating all of the time. So the switches were weird. I can't remember the name of the switches. They were like silvers or something like that, but they were, yeah, weird. So I got clickier ones, but at the cost of your ears, I guess. Yeah, the old Razer switches suck. The new like Huntsman, they have like laser based switches that are really nice. Like I have a Huntsman that I don't use since I'm typing all day. I wanted a more ergonomic keyboard, but like the those switches are solid. The Huntsman switches are pretty solid. I do like those. So but yeah, so again, sorry that my keyboard is nice and clicky. Anyway, so yeah, diving into this a little bit more too. Once we kind of set up our once we run our develop command in here, Gatsby gives us an interactive, like an IDE for GraphQL specific stuff, which is pretty sweet. It allows us to pretty much just like step through all of the data that is associated with our site, and write queries based on that data. And yeah, this just all comes by default when you run Gatsby. So this is super helpful to have, and we'll definitely use this a lot more once we dive into the data. So yeah, it spins this up on the same port, I guess, just at a different URL. Yeah, super handy little tool to have. Yeah, definitely. Sweet. So that should at least get us started. So let's kind of, the next step here is gonna let's set up like our I guess let's go through the structure of this super empty Gatsby theme here. So we, by default, so the way that Gatsby works is through, if you've ever worked with WordPress, the structure is kind of similar to like a WordPress theme. We have pages that we can individually like template out. As we add more pages, we can add, in here about.js or portfolio.js or whatever we want. And I think Gatsby just straight up maps those to like routes and stuff. So like, let's just try that. If we spin up an about page and essentially copy and paste what is in the index just to test it, and save that. I believe what Gatsby does is it just takes all of the files in here and outputs these as individual pages based on the file name. So if we go back out, not to Edge, but to Brave, and do /about, it takes us right to the about page. So it spins up those static files for us, just right out of the box. So it's super easy to get up and running and just output your pages just right within a implicit return function within a JavaScript file. So prototyping with like Gatsby or something like that, spinning up a site with a ton of pages, or whatever, getting your structure set is real easy with Gatsby. I'm going to remove this because we don't necessarily need it right now. Just wanted to show you how straightforward it was to add a new page. So this gives us a really good starting point for sure. Before we actually start diving into the code, let's get styled components and our like CSS linting and all of that sorted out. Because this theme comes with Prettier already, we won't need to do anything with that. Prettier has a settings file here, Prettier RC, that allows us to define the linting rules or the rules that Prettier abides by. Prettier is an opinionated CSS linting tool by default. It was built that way. A lot of people, when I first heard about Prettier too, I definitely had this preconceived notion, but Prettier is not intended to be some super highly customizable linting tool for folks to use. It's definitely opinionated. They do expose some of their settings, like you can see here, to let you customize it here and there. But it, like a big sticking point with some folks is like spaces versus tabs, and there are white space rules that Prettier adheres to that they have said in like their GitHub and stuff that they are not going to be flexible on because it is opinionated. So something to keep in mind if you're using Prettier. It's a little bit opinionated, but generally their rules are pretty solid, I think. So right off the bat, we have a few Prettier settings that we can mess with, but I don't think that I am going to change anything here. I think the defaults are probably fine for right now. I'll drop some of these in the chat so that you can check this out if you want. But the Prettier docs have a list of the options that are exposed that you can change. And we might, as we step through this site, change some of these settings. But I think for now, let's just see how the default settings work, and then as we need to, we'll change or not change things. Cool. So we've got Prettier in there by default, which is great. The next thing that we're going to need to do is get styled components into our Gatsby theme. So style components is just an npm package. Let's see if Gatsby has a lot of like Gatsby specific plugins that you need to install in order to use certain things with Gatsby. It just like integrates them with Gatsby's structure and stuff. So let's just like styled components Gatsby. Also too, like if you're a dev just starting out and you're watching this, like 90% of your life will just be Googling stuff and copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, right? That's the developer joke. That's pretty much all we do. But that's how I get all my information to figure out what I need to be doing. So I know the next step, I just don't know how to get there, and I will Google 1,000 things. So you'll be exposed to that as we go through this for sure. Cool. So looks like Gatsby has like a little tutorial for adding style components. This guy will learn setting up CSS and JS. Yep. They have a whole. Okay, so this is saying create a new site, which we've already done. And then they have, okay, here's our npm install. We're going to save these as dependencies. So they do have a Gatsby plugin specifically for styled components. Then we install the normal styled components package. And then they also install the styled components Babel plugin. So not too many additional dependencies there, but a few. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new terminal so we don't have to sit there and watch that. So we'll just copy and paste that. Same thing. That save flag is going to drop those into our dependencies here along with Prettier. Oops. There we go. And we'll install that. This is where you can play like the Jeopardy theme song in your head or something. That actually didn't take too long. Look at that. Oh, I misspoke. Sorry about that. These are dev dependencies. When we save, it just goes straight into dependencies. Cool. So yeah, you can see automatically added styled components, the Gatsby version, and the Babel version. Babel or Babel, I don't really know. Someone will yell at me about it, I'm sure. Yeah, cool. So that installed all of that. So we should be solid there. See if there's anything else that we need to do. So this is one of the things that I have played around with just a little bit as well. The actual like config of Gatsby, they expose a lot of options and stuff that you can extend. So when you install like a Gatsby specific plugin, generally your next move is going to be going into this Gatsby config file and adding it to the site. I'm not sure behind the scenes what this exactly does, but I imagine it integrates build process and all of that type of stuff. Just makes it a little bit easier for folks to not have to worry about like the Webpack config or something like that. So When we generated this new site, it came with a Gatsby config file, empty by default. We can start adding stuff here. So let's go ahead and do that. It's going to be exactly the same thing. We're just going to drop in the plugins and then specify the styled components Gatsby plugin specifically. There are some options and stuff that we could pass to the styled components bit. I think if we styled components docs tooling. Yeah. Well, no, is this right? Yeah. So it's actually within the plugin, and we'll get to that. I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here. So yeah, for now, we'll just add this plugin to our Gatsby config to make sure that Gatsby is aware of styled components. Save that. I think that, yeah, because we're adjusting the Gatsby config, we'll need to stop the develop process and restart it. Let's just make sure that there's no other changes that we need to make to this config for us to kind of get rolling. It seems like all we need to do now is run develop and kind of get going. Cool. I'll let that start back up. I wonder if it's going to choose a new port for me again. Hopefully it stays on the same port. Nope, naturally. That's all right. We'll get rid of these. And already have too many tabs open. Cool. Okay, so we should now have styled components in here and ready to go. We can test that out relatively simply. If you're not familiar with styled components, it's definitely something worth looking into. It's going to take a little while to get used to the syntax if you're not used to it. It looks pretty similar to CSS. If you are familiar with like a React application and stuff like that, you'll be able to, step your way through it and figure out what is happening where. But just to test it for now, let's import styled from styled components and then create a test wrapper that is a styled div. Does not matter. And then drop the CSS in here, and just for testing purposes, we'll go background color red. And instead of wrapping this in a div, we'll wrap this in test. Look at that. Lovely. Let me see if I can get these windows to look a little bit better so that you can see. Cool. So Gatsby does come with like hot module reloading and stuff just baked right in. So we change this to blue, save it, you'll see just changes to blue. Yeah, makes it really nice and easy to just kind of dive in and start developing and not worry about just settings and all the ridiculousness that sometimes does come with a like a JavaScript based build. If you were just doing a React project from scratch, there would be a lot of like Webpack setup and stuff unless you use like a generator or something like that. But this takes a lot of the headache out of it, which for me as like a primarily front-end developer type of person, I appreciate the heck out of, because I very much do not want to spend a lot of time figuring out tooling. So this helps. This makes it nice and easy, and the docs are great for Gatsby. So yeah, I'm kind of sounding like a Gatsby cheerleader, but I do quite enjoy it for sure. Cool. So we've got style components in there at a basic level, and we can kind of hit the ground running from here. So what I feel like, but it seems like a lot of people do during this process is they just start diving right into components and just start building out individual components for their site and stuff like that. One of the things that I've taken an interest in, I guess, is figuring out how to come up with a structured CSS architecture specifically for styled components, or for CSS and JavaScript, really for any application. I'm a proponent of people thoughtfully building out architectures for their sites, right? Rather than kind of just jumping into stuff and ending up with a site that has, a ton of components and a lot of shared styles here and there that can be that could be extrapolated out and componentized a little bit better. Starting to think about a CSS architecture earlier rather than later saves you a lot of time in the end, and kind of gets you used to working in a certain way. Yeah, definitely, TT. Information architecture is critical to long-term maintenance too, no doubt. Because if you start building a site with the intention of making it easy to manage in the future, then like regardless of whether or not you're the developer working on this project, whoever it is going to thank past you for at least making an attempt to thoughtfully organize and structure your project. There's no doubt about that. And it doesn't matter if like you don't really know where to start. Just trying and figuring something out is better than nothing. And like, documenting everything too is super helpful. So as you're moving along and figuring out what type of architecture you really enjoy, documenting what about that architecture you enjoy is super helpful. And then documenting stuff within the code as well just makes things a lot easier. So yeah, definitely. Information architecture, just architecture in general of your project is something good to always keep in the back of your head. That's a good analogy for sure. Yeah. Content is king, architecture is the castle. That's, no doubt. Cool. So yeah, let's dive into that a little bit more. So I'll go ahead and remove some of this. And I broke something somehow. Test is not, oh, well, yep. There we go. Cool. So let's add a couple of folders in the source here. So what we are definitely going to need, and not within pages, within source, we'll just keep this relatively basic. We're going to have a CSS folder that houses our CSS. Let's see. I planned this out a little bit, so let me make sure that I have the right thought process here, because my preferences for how to like name things changes like daily. So documenting this in a GitHub repo is helpful. Let me see if I can find how I did that. I think it was in House of Giants repo. Yeah, here we go. I'll drop this in the chat too so that you folks can see. Yeah, TT, that's exactly what I did. It's like whatever pops into my head at any given time. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds smart. We'll go with that. Here we go. Cool. So I in preparation for this stream kind of was like messing around with how to start a project. And this is more or less the final product. I'm not going to be like matching this one-to-one. Although maybe I am, because this is pretty much where my brain wants to go, standards wise. See, so there you go. You can already tell the CSS is not the right name for that. Let's go with styles. And that makes sense because it's not necessarily going to be CSS that we are writing. The files within that folder are not going to be CSS. They're going to be JavaScript, which is weird, and I still feel weird about it, but it ends up making sense in the context of styled components. So styles is definitely a more appropriate name for that. And then within the styles, there are 1,000 different methodologies for folder structure, and the one that I tend to try to subscribe to the most is like Brad Frost's atomic design. Yeah, like atomic design kind of methodology. So having things, but see, this is where it gets weird, is like I don't necessarily name things like atoms, molecules, organisms, that type of thing. They kind of are things that exist within the direct framework of a website, I guess, right? Where there's like, you can see here in the GitHub repo, I have like base styles, and in this base styles directory, there's a bunch of foundation level styles that the rest of the theme uses, or the rest of the site uses, to be built. So this is the base. This is the, I guess, like, these aren't even like atoms and stuff. This is essentially just defining variables, more or less. And then we get into, like global styles. And then as we get further down, we'll get into components, and then drill down even further into like individual, I don't even know what to name these other than like atoms, right? Just like button, heading, just super base level components. So that's kind of the end result of what we're gonna be doing here. So within here, we'll make another folder called base. And one of the things too that I like to do, so because we're like partialing out pretty much everything, like I want to, in this site, make sure that we have really tightly packaged components that only have the CSS associated with the component that is directly related to that component. So having a ton of partials means that we need to have pretty much at each level of these folders a controller, more or less, that does the importing or exporting of those styles for other pieces of the site to consume. So even at the base level here in the styles folder, we're going to pretty much just like this repo, we're going to make a styles.js controller. If you've worked with, Sass or Post CSS or anything like that, this is just the same thing as having a CSS controller that imports all your other partials. It does exactly the same thing, but it's going to just be doing it with JavaScript rather than CSS. So we'll see how that's handled here in a minute. And then from here in base, we will add a variables JavaScript file. There was something I was gonna mention, but now I lost it. That's all right. We'll come back to it. Before we move super far into like actually defining these variables and like figuring out colors and all of that type of stuff, let's think about this. Is this the right next move? Let's make sure. check my notes. Yeah, okay. So, in trying to be forward thinking to our to our future selves, we want to define a set of variables that we can pretty easily pass throughout the rest of the styles on the site. This is the thing that I was going to say. Global styles with styled components is admittedly a bit of a pain. I've tried this before in other projects, and pretty much, we set up the initial structure for how we want global styles to be applied, and it starts to get a little bit confusing. But we'll see if we can figure it out as we move along here. We'll get this to a point where we feel comfortable with it today, and then as time goes on, as we actually start to build pieces of this, it'll probably end up evolving. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Let me move this over, and then we can no, here. We will just kind of go off of what I have set up here already. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to use this as a reference and kind of explain it as I go through, rather than just copying and pasting from Stack Overflow. Cool. So this is where it starts to get a little bit weird, because we're going to start defining styles, start defining variables and colors and all of that type of stuff in a straight up JavaScript file. We are legitimately going to be exporting consts for exporting variables like JavaScript variables from this variables file into other areas of our styles that use styled components to consume that data, more or less. So we're just setting up some initial site variables here. These colors will change, but for now, I'm just going to name these black and white, just so that we can kind of get a grasp on what is happening. Export cons black, white, 0, 0, 0, and we don't need the semicolons. I stopped doing the semicolons because it's like fancy, new JavaScript. You don't need the semicolons, but it is just such a habit that I will have to delete semicolons frequently. See, there you go, every single time. Cool. So, we're defining just very basic variables for the site. If you want, you can do this for colors. You can do this for fonts if you wanted. I don't have any fonts that we're going to use right now, but if you want a const font primary, you can do that and have it be, Helvetica, and then, I guess you'd have to do this all in quotes. So it would be Helvetica, sans serif, whatever. It's just a string. Can I shrink this anymore? That's just gonna go away. That's fine. So yeah, you can do this with fonts, colors. These are literally just strings that we're assigning to variables. You can you do this for like media query breakpoints. If you really wanted to, we can absolutely throw some Comic Sans or some Papyrus in there, for sure. Or like I was saying, breakpoints. You can do export const bp tiny. And that would be like min width. We'll do like 20 ems or something like that. You're just essentially defining strings that are assigned to variables, that pretty much how you would with CSS variables or Sass variables. Same principle, just JavaScript variables. One of the things that you might be looking at and wondering why we're doing this, I'm exporting every single one of these variables independently, so that if we were in a component, for example, that we knew only needed a specific like two specific colors, right? We knew for sure that that was only ever going to be the case. We were only ever going to use two colors in this. So I like having the option. And there's no, as far as I know, and I could be wrong, but there's no like the performance hit to exporting a ton of variables. So yeah, I just, until it becomes a problem, I can export all of these individually and then import them all individually as I see fit. Yeah, makes it nice and easy that way. What I do also recognize, though, is that as you're building out a component, you may not know what colors you're going to need or all the specifics. You may not want to import each one of these individually, which is totally understandable. We have a way around that where we can export a new const called colors and make this an object. And then within this object, we just add the variables that we've defined. And from here, we can save this. It's not going to actually do anything. But from here, we can then import the colors object and specifically, through like object notation, get the colors that we want that way. Cool. So I think this is a good start. I'm going to remove these two because they are just examples. So we've got a couple colors, nothing crazy. We can save that. All of these variables are being exported, but they're not being consumed anywhere, right? So if we go back to our files, we'll see in our base, like we were talking about, we don't have that controller that we need. So we'll make an index, and I just default to calling it index, and that signifies to me personally that this is a controller that just is going to be used to pass styles around the app. So if we wanted to export everything from variables, I said it, but I didn't type it, from variables, we can certainly do that. This makes the entirety of the variables file available. But as I talk through this, I guess that is not necessarily what we want, because we only want to be importing specific pieces of the variables file. So the controller that we have here isn't necessarily going to be used for exporting variables. I can explain this a little bit better through an example, right? So like, let's say we're in this, our index component or whatever, and we wanted to change the background of the styled component that we built. Instead of, using a hard-coded value, we wanted to leverage a variable that we've written, right? I'll save that and we should get, cool. Yeah, that auto updated. What we can do then is import colors from, and this is going to be annoying, we are up one folder, into styles, into base, into variables. See, I have to keep adding that semicolon. So what we're doing here is then dipping into the variables file, grabbing the colors object, and then this should allow us to do color dot, nope. I don't want that autocomplete, thank you. Color.black. I broke it. Oh, that's because so we're in a template literal. Anytime you write a styled component, you're writing a template literal that is just CSS. So I did not escape this properly. So it wasn't looking at a JavaScript reference. It was just trying to interpret what I was talking about. And I still broke it. All right, let's see. Color is not defined because it's not the name of the variable. We still have a warning. Export default imported as colors was not found in styles-based variables. Okay. Are we required to have a default? I don't think we're required to have a default. Checking my notes. Export default imported as colors was not found in styles base variable. That's not right. We should be able to just reference. Because it's not a default, it needs to be within these curly brackets. That's how you import. There you go. Individually exported variable from a partial. Yeah, my mistake. Cool. All right, so that's all sorted out. So we can import individual variables from our variables file through the alias notation here. Curly brackets, variable name, then it gives us access to that object. So within our, we can, keep writing, color, we need to escape here and do colors.white. And within CSS, you definitely still want the semicolons. So this gives us access to all of our variables. So as we start building out components, we can very deliberately import pieces of our variables file to allow us to leverage those variables. I'm not sure, thinking about it, like trying to think about the future, I wonder if there's ever going to be an instance where we just want to import the variables file, and just be like, I don't want to have to think about each individual thing that I'm importing. I just want all of the variables and let me access them that way. As I think about that, though, I'm kind of more drawn to this method because it allows us to be thoughtful, again, about what it is that we are importing and why we're using what we're using in the context of the component, right? It's essentially forcing us to be more thoughtful than just being like, "Bleh, give me every variable, give me all of them. We're gonna use some of them, but I want all of them." So yeah, this feels good to me so far. Yeah, all right, cool. So I like that. We've got a super basic variables setup here. I'm not going to spend too much time going through. I won't bore you with trying to find like a color palette and all of that type of stuff. I mean, unless that seems super interesting to everyone, then we can kind of just move on. Another thing too that we can add here, so just like an accessibility thing that is something that I've seen used in the past is like the whole reduced motion thing. If there's going to be animations and transitions on your site, there are folks who through system settings can set a prefers reduced motion flag that we can detect and essentially stop all transitions and stuff like that. Color schemes. I've not seen that. Let's look at that. Oh, interesting. It's just like a bot that's pretty sweet. It does have like every color theme ever, like every every combination and variation. That's pretty funny. One that I've used in the past is coolers. I like this one quite a bit. Oh, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I don't remember that Twitter account at all. Or maybe it was cool. Maybe you're referencing Coolers. Yeah, Cooler used to be a an Adobe thing. It was like Cooler Colors or something like that. Um, yeah, it's now just color.adobe.com. It's relatively similar, but what I like about Coolors, is it's like user generated, right? So you can log into this and have an account and like save several color palettes that you like, or create your own and then, have it be publicly visible or whatever. They have like pics and people can like or save and share them and stuff like that. But this is yeah, this is pretty cool. I like Coolers quite a bit. Cool. So yeah, kind of moving back into this. I'll drop this in the chat too if you want to take a look at that as well. So yeah, this we could just choose a random one and then I can change it if I want to change it at some point. But yeah, you can essentially, take these colors, change the variable names to match the names of the colors. It's another part of what I like about this is it gives you the name of the color, so you don't have to think about calling this, off-white, pink, orange, like whatever. These are just color names that they give you. So you can export const linen and then apply that dim gray. Actually, we'll go with Charleston green. Sure, Charleston green looks good. And then Paradise pink. And we'll call that good for now. Because we're writing in JavaScript here, we could probably write like a map function or a loop, or we could define this in a different way so that we don't have to individually add each color to our colors object. We can probably automate this a little bit more if we wanted to, but I'll just leave it like this for now, and I'll kind of explore that. But I guess if you're getting to the point where you need to map over a ton of variables to put colors, excuse me, into an object, you might be using too many colors on your site. So this might just help us be a little bit more thoughtful here too. So just a thought there. But so yeah, we have these colors now set up. If we go back into our index and we want to use Charleston green and the pink, Paradise pink as the color, then there we go. We sure can do that. Cool. So yeah, that sets up our variables. I got off on a tangent about colors, and I was talking about the prefers reduced motion bit. The prefers reduced motion is just an accessibility thing, removes all animation so that folks with sensitivity to things moving on the screen can opt out of that if they want. So I like to make sure that I have that turned on for all the sites that I build. We're going to just call this prefers reduced motion .js, and I have a snippet that we've used in the past that just allows us to access that. So let's first, actually this will be a good introduction into the next bit. So when you're using styled components, there are several ways to define essentially CSS that we're writing. On our index page, we've already looked at how to And actually, I probably didn't explain this very well. So let me backtrack here for just a second. When working with styled components, you can import this method from styled components and then have access to all of the functionality associated with styled. Styled is just one of many methods within styled components that you can leverage to write CSS, right? So this particular method gives us access to all of the DOM elements that are available in HTML, right? Divs, sections, header, H1s through H6, all any HTML element you can think of, tables if you need tables. All of that is available through this styled method, right? So in this specific case, I am defining a component more or less that will have styles applied to it that then wraps some text and then is output on the page. I'm telling styled components that I want you to output a div as this wrapper element. If I wanted to change this to an H1, I most certainly could, and that'll change the text to an H1 itself. This essentially defines the element that your component is going to be comprised of. So yeah, like I said, you have access to every single HTML element, and then it applies those styles directly to that element. Looking at the source, you'll see that, and this is true for pretty much, any CSS and JavaScript, or even if you're using CSS modules, if you're building a React application that uses CSS, it's pretty standard to, obfuscate the class name to prevent conflicts and stuff like that, right? Of course, right now I'm drawing a blank on the actual technical term for it. Hashing. It hashes these class names. Hey, how's it going? Digitally, I'm sure that I know who you people are in chat, and I don't know the usernames. So if I know you, hello. Cool. So yeah, that's style components and stuff. Pretty solid. I need to go grab some water. I blew through this 40-ounce bottle of water real quick because I'm talking so much. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Woo! All right. Cool. No worries, Digitally. I appreciate you stopping by to hang out. Cool. All right. Where were we? Sweet. So, yeah, that was a rundown of one of the basic ways to add some styles. Going back into our prefers reduced motion, the another way that we can write CSS with styled components is just by defining a it's through something called CSS from something called CSS. There's an alias that we have access to through styled components called CSS that all it does is allows us to write CSS within a template literal. It's not assigned to anything. It's not we're not defining an element. We're not telling styled components that we want it to output anything. This isn't going to output anything at all. We are just defining some CSS that we can leverage elsewhere. So that's what this CSS alias allows us to do here. And then we can do this through, just export const prefers reduced motion, and use that CSS alias, write out a template literal. And then from here, we are just writing normal CSS like we would, right? The snippet that I have copied and pasted is a media query. That checks for the prefers reduced motion flag. And if it's set to reduce, then it does a catch-all selector for every element's before and after, and removes any animation or transition. It drops it down. This is like a semantics thing, but the dropping it down to, an unnoticeable duration allows us to essentially, if someone has this prefers reduced motion setting flagged in their OS, then it'll remove any animation or transition. Cool, yeah, digitally, hopefully that explained it. Yeah, it's just an accessibility thing that I'd like to make sure is addressed in sites that I start building. If someone has this flagged, we kill all the animations so that it doesn't trigger, anyone who's sensitive to stuff moving around on the screen. So just an accessibility feature here. And it's a good way for us to kind of get accustomed to the different ways of writing CSS with styled components. So yeah, that should take care of the prefers reduced motion piece. We'll save that. And this is actually then where we will leverage our controller within base, right? So we want to take that prefers reduced motion and export it as just like as a part of the base global styles that we're going to be using everywhere. All of this is going to lead up to us defining global styles that are output all the time with styled components. So that's kind of the trajectory that we're headed right here. So from here, we can export everything from prefers reduced motion. And that should give us access to the prefers reduced motion component here, or variable here. Yeah, just going to be CSS that is output on the page. Checking my notes here, make sure. So with encoding line. Sure, digitally, absolutely. Yeah, go for it. While you're typing it out, I'm going to check my notes, make sure that I didn't miss anything here. Okay, cool. Yeah, feel free to type it out in chat, and once I see it, I'll respond to it. But I'm gonna keep moving forward here. So we have defined one very basic global style that we want applied at all times in our application, right? So kind of to dive back into a little bit how styled components works. Styled components, and I've talked about this on the stream before too. I'm not sure if there's a VOD of it or not, but in any case, the basic way that styled components works is it takes all of the styles for your site. It figures out what components are being rendered on the page. It then outputs that CSS within the head, within a style block in the head. So it is, in theory, and this is something that you kind of have to keep an eye on or assess yourself as well as you're building this thing. it gives you like critical CSS on its own. So you're only loading the CSS that you need at any given time when the page is loaded. So critical CSS, there's no extra request to a large bloated CSS file that contains all the styles, regardless of whether or not you're using them. This is super tiny, and let me see if I can. There we go. Great. Increase the font size there. So yeah, you get critical CSS. You get general performance benefits, assuming that you're coming from a large bloated CSS file that, is hurting your performance. But in any case, so style components is outputting all of this CSS into the head on every single page, right? So only the components that you're using. You can see here, these class names are incredibly not descriptive, and that's something that we'll look into changing here as well. But you can see it's outputting the CSS that we wrote here. It's interesting because we only have one set of CSS that is being output on the page. And it actually, I think it's because we were hot module reloading. Let's double check that. And it was just appending style after style after style. Yeah, into the head. So thank goodness that scared me, because that would have been a nightmare if one CSS addition to your app added 8 lines of inline styles or styles within a block. Oh, cool. There's digitally. Okay. All right. So digitally says, so I'm a UX UI guy and I do front end occasionally. I'm good with most React stuff, but I was checking out Twitch's dev, and at one point they're talking about scopes in their API. I have no idea what that is and how to connect with scopes. Can you explain them to me? So that's a good question. I'd have to see, I guess, the context of where they were talking about scopes, because if that's an API specific thing where they have pieces of their API that they expose in different ways that are, I guess, scoped, then perhaps that's what they're talking about, or it's just like very specific pieces of the API that they're exposing. So that could be one explanation. I think I'd have to have the context of the full conversation. We can take a look at this just real quick and see. See, it required scope. Is that the required scope? Yep. See, there you go. That's a good question, because I'm definitely more on the front end side of things myself as well. So once you start getting into like API interactions and stuff like that is where it gets out of my wheelhouse just a little bit. But what I think in this context, what I think this is referring to is when you set up your like Twitch API to like hook into so that you can get data from like you as a user, right? You have to allow certain permissions to get access to the data that this piece of the API is referring to. So that's why it's under this authentication heading. So your specific call to this part of the API needs to have the bits read like permission, essentially. I have no idea how to check or change that or work with that, because I've not worked with the Twitch API at all. But I imagine that if you Google around a little bit and if you find, like if you Google for, Twitch API allow scope or allow bits read or something like that, it might get you a little bit more information. But yeah, this is referring directly to like permissions from the API into your application. Whatever is requesting that data needs to have these permissions. to get at that data. In the old API, you could just put in the header section of your call or in the URL directly. Yeah, the way that the new API works may be a little bit more secure, because that if you could just straight up like put in a username and then like add a query string for whatever data you wanted to get, that's generally a pretty unsecure, not secure way of like passing data around, especially when it's something like, in particular here for like bits, that may be something that you don't necessarily want people to have access to, so they put it behind this permissions piece. It makes it a little bit tougher to get at. So yeah, sorry I don't have too much more information on that, but hopefully that at least gives you a little bit more context. Yeah, that's the curl stuff is yeah, server side, like getting and requesting things. Yeah, that's it's complicated for sure. Hopefully that helps though. Yeah, no worries. Cool. So yeah, back to Gatsby. So as we were saying, yeah, it style components is outputting the hashed class name along with the styles that we associated in here right in the head. It's only the components that are ever on the page at a given time. What we want to do here is also output our global styles, right? Like the things that are going to be used in every component that we know for sure. We definitely want this accessibility bit for the prefers reduced motion. So let's figure out how to drop that into here. Digitally, no, it's not my first time using it. I've toyed around with it a little bit. I'm certainly not like a Gatsby expert or anything like that. I know enough to kind of step through it and be a little bit hopefully helpful and explanatory, especially if people have questions and stuff about it. But yeah, I toyed around with it a little bit. Haven't gotten super far into the weeds with it yet, so I'm excited to kind of go through this and try and figure out what we can do with Gatsby for sure. So let's figure out how to get prefers reduced motion into our global styles. We're going to go back to Google and Gatsby styled components. You can tell I've already searched this. Global styles. The way that I think that this is going to go, and I guess we can see how right or how terribly wrong I'm going to be here. One of the things that we have in here, we don't have it in here yet. So one of the things that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add a component more or less that is like a general full site layout type of thing. This full page layout is essentially going to wrap our entire application and then output stuff every time there's a page. So let's do that. Let's, well, here, first search for it. There's a Gatsby article about it. Let's figure that out. Creating global styles with CSS and JS style components. This just took us back to the explainer for styled components. Global. Standard global, no. CSS lecture. Okay, that may not actually be helpful. What have I clicked on in the past here? Convert the Gatsby default starter to styled components. Do they have any reference to global? Global styles. All right, let's check this out. Oh yeah, digitally page transit. That's something that I want to look into a lot more. Especially anytime you work with a React or like a Gatsby app or something like that, and doing page transitions looks cool. That's up. We'll probably get into it on a later stream here for sure. Once we have multiple pages to work with and figure out what those transitions are, we'll work through it and hopefully by then maybe you'll have some more insight and can help talk us through it too. That would be great. Have a layout.js file that was just that. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for here. So let's Gatsby layout component. I'm really good at typing. Layout components. This is exactly what I was looking for. Yep. Gatsby does not by default automatically apply layouts to pages. There are ways to do so. Follows React's compositional thing. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So what we're going to want to do here then is create a layout. So let's add a new folder in here. Let's call this templates. I think that I did this in the Gatsby starter that I had, and do I want to call this templates? Now in my Gatsby starter here, I'll put this back up here so we can all see what I'm looking at. In this initial thing that I was playing around with, I created a theme folder and then created the layout component within that theme folder. And this is where all of our global styles and everything go. So that's what we'll do here. So we'll rename this from templates to theme. And then create a layout file. So this layout component is going to wrap every single page. This will be a good place too for us to put like any meta information, any any of those like social, like if you need like Facebook sharing or something like that, all the OG tags. There's a good React I guess like header manager thing called Helmet that I've used in the past that very easily allows us to like add and update like meta data and information and stuff like that. So we'll probably end up using this layout file for that as well. Cool. So yeah, we'll just kind of dive into this. So we're going to want to, by default, just import React from React. That'll allow us to, I don't need the semicolon. I'm going to do that a million times. That'll allow us to just build a layout component, and we'll just do a basic arrow function that returns a div. And within this div, this layout component is going to wrap everything, right? So it's going to essentially act as a higher order component. So we want all of the children of whatever it is that this layout component is wrapping to be output within this div. We can add a class name to this too and call it, app or whatever if we want. App's probably, because this isn't necessarily an app. Let's call it layout. Base layout. We're just going to call it layout for now. We'll change the name if we need to. Can't get hung up on freaking class names. I do that. Oh, is Helmet already in Gatsby Digital? Yeah, it looks like it's a plugin. Because yeah, the starter that we ended up going with, the Hello World starter that we ended up going with, it didn't have it as a dependency in here. So I don't think that Helmet, it may be with another theme or like the normal like initial Gatsby setup. But we went with this super blank theme here. Yeah, it looks like, at least from this theme, they did decouple it, which is good. You know, you want to make sure that there's a nice, clean slate to start with, and then as you add things, you kind of have to, again, be mindful of what you're adding and why, and whether or not that dependency is something that's super necessary. So we'll eventually, probably next stream, actually dive into Helmet and see if Helmet is something that can help us solve any issues. For now, yeah, we'll skip over it for now and kind of dive into it later this week. Cool. So yes, this layout component, I'm missing an equals sign. This layout component, essentially just a higher order component that's wrapping all of our children. We'll go ahead and export this so that we have access to it. Export default layout. Don't need the semicolon. Okay, let's just add this to our index page. I'm going to drop this into some parens so that we can start nesting things a little bit better. And this is going to auto import, right? Yeah. VS Code is quite helpful in that way. Cool. So I defined our layout component. VS Code helpfully automatically imported our layout component from the correct path. Excuse me. And I think that should be all we need. If we save that, go back to our local host. Children is not defined. Okay. So within the layout, we need to actually pass these children as props, right? These are like render props. Right? Yeah. That should do it. Yeah, so we're telling the layout component, hey, expect children, use those as props more or less, and then output them within layout. So if we go and inspect here, we can see that we are wrapping successfully our entire application, or our, at least like the Gatsby portion of our site, with the layout div, which is good. So that gives us a global component that is going to be used, and this is where we want to apply our global styles to. Let's look at the styled components. Documentation. And I'll drop this into chat so that folks have it just in case. Okay, let's look for global. That's global class. Global class, server-side rendering, styling normal. Did I already go through all of it? There's a method. Appreciate you following digitally. Thank you. Glad to have you here for sure. There's a styled components. You can create global style is the method. Oh, so it was in here. No, this is a different page. This is very confusing. Create global styles. There we go. Helpers. That's what we're looking for. Appreciate you stopping by digitally. Have a good night. So create global style. This is another method for us to write CSS in styled components. Relatively self-explanatory. It's going to create global styles for us, right? What this allows us to do, let's step through this and make sure that I explain it right. This is a helper function to generate special styled component that handles global styles. Normally, styled components are automatically scoped to a local CSS class and therefore isolated from other components. In the case of create global style, this limitation is removed and things like CSS resets or base style sheets can be applied. It's exactly what we need. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. So just like all the other stuff, it's a tagged template literal, returns a styled component that does not accept children, place it at the top of your React tree, and the global styles will be injected when the component is rendered. So as soon as our layout component is rendered, which it should be at the top level of every page, because once we start adding pages, we'll make sure that we wrap our page in this layout component. It should then apply all of these global styles to the head and dump this specific CSS into the head style block there. So let's handle that. From here, we'll create a new const called global styles. And this is going to be like an element that we actually add. So we'll capitalize the first letter. And this does not need to be an arrow function or anything. We are just going to use create global style. Create global style. And we need to make sure that we import that. So import as an alias, create global style from styled components. We create the global style, and then just like in the example here, we can drop in a so we already defined some markup, so we don't need to drop this into body or anything like that. If we wanted to, let's just test this. Body background color, we'll import from colors and do linen. And let me organize these a little bit better. I just want to add a return here to separate out my stuff from the global stuff. Global styles is assigned a value but never used. That makes sense because we never actually called global styles within here. It's a self-closing tag. We should be good. Compiled successfully. Sweet. Look at that. So within, and I'll refresh this so that all of our extra styles go away. Within our global styles element, we wrote some CSS that applies a background color to the body. You can see that right there. And the color scheme's nice. I like that. Yeah, just drops it in. The style components outputs these comments that help to identify where these styles are coming from. So you can see that this is a styled component. It's a global styled component, and then it has this like giant ID that means nothing to us. But yeah, that is, I broke it because I uncommented that. That outputs our global style. So what we want to do then is potentially in addition to the, I mean, you know, because we'll probably want some background or some style on the body as a whole. But from here, what we can do is output the CSS that we wrote for prefers reduced motion. Since this is a component, essentially, that is just writing out CSS, we should be able to take this component and drop it directly in here. And we can do prefers reduced motion. It'll auto import that from styles base. Let me get rid of this so we can see the whole thing. So from our styles base, because we have an index.js file, the import knows to look for this index first and import stuff from the controller, right? So it's not, I guess, just my personal preference that I use index. It helps for the importing of files. So that should, we'll close that and get rid of that. Import prefers reduced motion from styles base. We will output the prefers reduced motion alias here. Let's save that and see what we get. We're obviously not going to see anything in particular, but if we look at the markup, presumably what we should see is a nice media query written out that removes all the animations, transitions, duration, sets it to important, handles all of that. That's awesome. Perfect. So we are well on our way to creating a nice set of global styles. All right, looking at my notes here. So one of the things that I like to, that I want to try to avoid doing, I suppose, is this is just kind of an inherent potential issue with style components in general. And what we want to try to avoid doing is having this JavaScript file that has like 100 lines of CSS in it and just have it be super massive, really unwieldy, and have there end up being 100 lines before you actually get to the component, right? So we don't want to write a whole bunch of CSS directly into this create global style call. We want to try to portion that out as much as we can. To again keep things clean and also be a little bit thoughtful about what we're importing, what we're defining as global, and why we're defining it that way. So let's look at like a set of, just checking my notes again here. Styles. We got the layout. I'm trying to think of what global styles we would want. I guess we could do, yeah, let's do like a, actually, I think Digitally mentioned this, or like when they first joined, but adding a reset to like normalize. Like if you've used a CSS, like a style sheet reset to kind of normalize all of the components on the site. And let's see, is that something that we want to have output all of the time, every single page, on every single page in the head? Because let's look at normalize, right? Normalize CSS. Go to the GitHub and look at the actual length of normalize.css. So yeah, we're talking about 350 lines almost of CSS that we would be committing to outputting in the head. I'm not sure I want to commit to that. So maybe what we'll do instead of leveraging a reset is just I guess more or less resetting components as we build them, right? Like if we really needed, because we really don't need to reset like inputs or buttons and stuff like that globally. We can just do that on a per component basis. So yeah, we won't do that. Let's get rid of that body. Colors is defined but never used. Okay, yeah, well, that makes sense. Remove that. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so what we will do then is inside of base, let's add just a new file called call it like site resets. So this will allow us to be a little bit more deliberate about what we are resetting. You can tell here. So one of the things that I know for sure that we want to reset is like if you look at the body, by default in the user agent style sheet, it comes with a margin on it, which I've never understood why. I'm sure there's a story behind why there's always a margin on the body. It's because I'm outputting that as an H1. That's okay. I'm sure there's a reason why there's a default margin on the body, but I have never once wanted that and have always reset that. So again, this keeps lending itself to us, and I made this a CSS file and not a JavaScript file because of habit. This keeps lending itself to forcing us to be deliberate, be thoughtful about why we're doing what we're doing, and actually explore the reasons for it. So it's another solid example, I guess, or solid use case for why doing style components like this feels good to me personally. Cool. So let's write some site resets. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is import, again, CSS, because we're just going to be writing straight CSS and then import it into our global styles. So import style, CSS from styled components. And then within here, we'll just export const site resets and have that equal to CSS inside of a template literal. Now we can start writing. We'll do this for body margin 0. Let's just stop right there for right now and then add that to our layout. In addition to prefers reduced motion, we need to make sure that we export this first, right? So export everything from site resets. That makes it available to everybody. And then we should be able to just straight up import site resets. Although why? I was hoping you would auto import, but perhaps not. And I don't think this needs doesn't need a comma or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and save that and refresh here. Excuse me. My throat gets so dry when I talk for so long. Oh boy. Okay. So I think that this actually applied properly. If we look at the body margin 0, perfect. We'll add a color to that. I liked that linen for now. I'm not sure that we'll keep it, but we'll just add a couple more styles for the sake of adding them. Background color. And then we'll go with colors dot. Not colors dot colors. What happened to my auto import? Import colors from base. Oop, we're already in base variables. And we should have colors dot. No, it's not linen. This happens to me every once in a while where oh, it is just linen. Okay, maybe I'm losing it. Site resets, colors dot linen. And I forgot a semicolon. It's interesting. So when applying global styles, it apparently does not hot module reload those styles. Is there like a glare? Hold on 1 second. Oh, there is. Where is that coming from? Oh, I bet you. Hold on. Good morning, puppies. Yeah, maybe that's a little better. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Sweet. So yeah, it appears that changing global styles does not hot modular reload. I wonder why that is. I'm sure it just has something to do with the way that this create global style function runs. Interesting. In any case, cool. This feels a little bit better to me. It allows us to define specific chunks of CSS that we want to add to the global style. I guess, yeah, but see that's yeah, we're not even going to talk about the reset because we already went through that. So I just keep going back and forth on it because I'm not sure. Shoot, my notifications turned back on. Give me one sec. Yeah, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure that adding all of those like 350 lines of CSS is worth it, because we can be much more deliberate with that. So yeah, awesome. We're creating chunks of CSS that we're very deliberately adding into our global styles. That's great. We can add other specific site resets if we wanted to add. Let's add a new file, call it typography. If we wanted to add some styles, import CSS from style components, and we wanted to do const typography equals CSS template literal, and we wanted to do stuff like all H1s are going to have no margin to start with. We need to export this. Then we import it or export it from the controller. And then in the layout, we add it as a new typography. Add this to our. And I'm going to do this just for readability's sake. That kind of looks gross, but at least it's all on one line. So yeah, we've added typography from styles base. If I refresh this, there should be no margin on our H1. All that type of stuff. This gives us a pretty good base for creating a CSS architecture, a system that fairly easy to understand, fairly easy to manage, helps us to be thoughtful, especially initially, because when we're starting out building sites initially, more often than not, we're just like, all right, dump all these things in here. These are the things that we know we're going to need down the line. And then a lot of times you don't end up using all of the features that you added at the start. So this helps to keep us, keep us thoughtful, keep us forward thinking, and all of that. So I think this is probably a good spot for us to, first to stop. It's almost been 2 hours. I think this gives us a good base to build on. This one is probably going to be a little shorter. This stream is probably going to be a little shorter than the other ones. Once we actually start diving into building components and features and stuff like that, then we'll mess around with a little bit more. But this, I wanted to just kick this off so that for myself, I'm kind of responsible, or trying to make sure that I stay in the habit of streaming or doing this once a week at the very least. So my plan is going to be doing this again on likely Friday. I'll shoot out a tweet if you don't. I'll shoot out a tweet to let you know when the next one will be. I'll try and keep a consistent schedule every week, so it's going to be definitely every Tuesday. I will be on here around the same time, probably around 1:00, doing this, and then I'll figure out what the second day during the week is, and that's going to be a an optional one. If I'm able to do that second day, then it'll always be on, Friday, for example. And then that'll just give us a good cadence to kind of make some fairly meaningful progress on this. But I think for now, we'll call it here. If there's anyone in the chat that has any questions or wants to go over any of the stuff that we talked about today, I'll keep rambling for a couple minutes to see if there's anyone out there who wants to talk about anything else. But yeah, absolutely, TT. I appreciate you hanging out as well. Thanks for sticking with me. Apologies if the keyboard was super clicky throughout the whole thing, but hopefully the content was still good. Yeah, and if anyone else is oh, Tyler, is that you? Is that you, Tyler? I'm pretty sure that's you. You're the only SEO guy. Yeah. What's up, Tyler? Glad you're here, man. It's appreciate you hanging out. Good. I'm glad the keyboard was fine. Do you feel Gatsby offers any SEO advantages? I think static site generators in general, so things like Gatsby, 11D, Jekyll, all of those other things, they do make it easier to be better at SEO than general React applications would, right? So like by default, unless you have server-side rendering for like a React application, like let's just say we were to from scratch build, and here, let me I'll do this so it seems like we're actually having a conversation. If you're building a straight up React application from scratch, then you have to implement server-side rendering and all of this other stuff in order to get markup on the page. So part of the problem that I think Googlebot or like the SEO community in general was having with like React applications initially is that before server-side rendering and stuff became pretty mainstream, most of the React applications were just spitting out like an empty div on the page and then having JavaScript inject all of the markup for the application in that single div after the page is loaded, right? So in contrast from those days, I think things have gotten a lot better because people recognize that was a problem. So React apps generally are either output as static files or use server-side rendering to actually put markup on the page for Googlebot to crawl. Gatsby removes some of the overhead of that, or like static site generators in general. I don't want to like make it seem like I'm hitching my horse to one thing too much, because there are lots of really good options out there. But static site generators in general will help developers not have to think about that as much, because it just outputs flat files. We can look too, just so you can see like the inner workings, I guess. Once Gatsby like runs and compiles and does all of this, it has a, let's see if this is actually where this ends up being output. So you have page data, index, about, dev 404. Oh, I think that I need to do, this might not have been a great example. Start, serve, test, develop, format, start. Yeah, in any case though, it just outputs static markup. So when we inspect this, it's not an empty div. You see all the content on the page. It's all there. These are flat files that are being served to the server. So basically, you're avoiding the issues Googlebot has with rendering because Gatsby and other static page generators have everything rendered before Googlebot gets there. Exactly. You have a fully, it's just an HTML file. It's just a straight up HTML file that has all of the markup associated with it, and it's just there. That's the benefit of static site generators just in general. Yeah. I want to see if they have like a static PWA generator. You get code and data splitting out of the box. Loads only critical HTML, CSS data in JavaScript, so your site loads as fast as possible. So yeah, all that's just out of the box. So it may significantly improve crawl speed in Lighthouse tests. Yeah, I mean flat files will likely run faster in a Lighthouse test. There's actually a good article about Lighthouse in general and the flaws that using those metrics as like standards is. It's like building the worst accessible passing lighthouse site or something like that. Building the most inaccessible site possible with a perfect lighthouse score. I'll drop this in for you to read at your leisure. But I'm sure that everything has flaws. But yeah, this article was incredibly interesting, because it just runs a Lighthouse test on a super inaccessible website and it gets perfect scores. But yeah, in any case, the crawl speed, at least, which is the metric you were actually asking about, should increase because it's a flat file. We're not injecting a lot of stuff via JavaScript. Once we actually get into like building functionality and interactions for the site, then we should get a little bit more insight into how things are actually working. Because yeah, I'm not sure what the output of like a JavaScript component would look like on a flat file and stuff. But it's one of those things that you kind of have to keep an eye on as you're building, because like it's probably very easy to bloat a site like this. So yeah, no doubt. I'll I mean we can run one on my this wouldn't be a good example because I really don't have a lot of functionality other than the theme switcher. Yeah, once we actually fully build this out, we can run some performance test metrics, on the House of Giants site and see where we get. But yeah, Gatsby has, I mean, their little trust bar thing. Airbnb potentially uses it. Nike, PayPal. Maybe these are just like big sites built with Gatsby. Yeah, Gatsby has a showcase. I'll drop that in there. You can look. Yeah, there's like a specific portion of Airbnb that's using it. The React.js site uses Gatsby, apparently. It's like all their documentation and stuff. Impossible Foods, Braun, apparently. This Braun is like a e-commerce site and everything like that. This is apparently built with Gatsby. Yeah, interesting. It looks like there's a good amount out there. But yeah, I mean, except for the special offers thing being broken, the rest of this looks pretty snappy. especially with like e-commerce and stuff like that. Nah, I guess e-commerce, it just links you out to Amazon and stuff. Some of it's not working super well. But yeah, interesting. Kinetico. Interesting. I've never even heard of Kinetico. Kentico. Oh, it's a .NET. See, yeah, I have biases, but yeah, I don't know what like modern .NET development is like. I guess with like Azure and stuff, it's probably much better than it used to be. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's worth looking into. It would be very interesting to see two similarly sized sites and what their performance metrics and stuff are. One using your framework of choice, and one using something like Gatsby or a static site generator. Cool. Well, I think that's going to do it for me. I think we're off to a good start here. I again will make sure that I tweet out the schedule for another stream this week. I got a ton of stuff going on, so I need to figure out what day and time would work best. But I'll figure something out and tweet it out. But yeah, thank you, man, for joining. I appreciate you hanging out the whole time. That was awesome. Yeah, we'll keep doing this, and hopefully I'll keep seeing you in the chat, Tyler. Good talking to you, man. We'll see everyone later. Bye.